Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about one of the most dangerous and least discussed crises in Iran, a crisis that is slowly destroying the country from within. This is not a sudden disaster or a temporary problem. This is Iran's deepening water crisis, a silent emergency that is reshaping daily life, damaging the economy, fueling protests, and threatening the country's future stability. Iran is a country historically known for its ancient water management systems, underground canals, rivers, and fertile plains. For thousands of years, civilization survived in this region by carefully balancing nature and human needs. But today that balance has collapsed. Rivers are drying up, lakes have disappeared, groundwater is vanishing, and entire cities are struggling to secure enough drinking water for their populations. What was once a land of water engineering is now facing a man-made environmental catastrophe. Iran's geography has always been challenging. Much of the country lies in arid and semi-arid zones, with limited rainfall and long dry seasons. However, natural dryness alone does not explain the scale of today's crisis. The real causes are decades of poor planning, political decisions, over-extraction of water resources, uncontrolled dam construction, and the prioritization of short-term development over long-term sustainability. Climate change has intensified the problem, but it did not create it. One of the biggest contributors to Iran's water crisis is the massive overuse of groundwater. For years, wells were drilled without regulation, especially in agricultural regions. Farmers, facing pressure to increase production, relied heavily on underground water to irrigate crops. Industries also consumed huge amounts of water with little oversight. As a result, groundwater levels dropped dramatically across the country. In many areas, the land itself has begun to sink, damaging buildings, roads, and infrastructure. This land subsidence is irreversible and represents one of the most alarming consequences of water mismanagement. At the same time, Iran invested heavily in dam construction. Hundreds of dams were built across rivers with the promise of energy production, irrigation, and water security. But these dams disrupted natural water flows, dried downstream ecosystems, and reduced water availability for entire regions. In some cases, dams were constructed without proper environmental assessments, leading to devastating outcomes for local communities. Rivers that once supported agriculture, wildlife, and urban life have been reduced to dry riverbeds. One of the most symbolic examples of this crisis is the Zayand-e-Rud River in Isfahan. Once the lifeline of the city, the river now remains dry for most of the year. Bridges that once crossed flowing water now stand over dust and cracked earth. Farmers downstream have lost their livelihoods, tourism has declined, and social tensions have increased. The river's disappearance is not just an environmental loss but a cultural and economic tragedy. Khuzestan province presents another grim picture. Despite being one of Iran's most water-rich regions historically, it has become a hotspot of water protests. Rivers like Karan and Karkay have been severely depleted. Residents face water shortages, pollution, and extreme heat. Protests over water access have repeatedly erupted, sometimes turning violent as security forces intervene. These protests reveal how water scarcity is transforming into political unrest. Rural areas have suffered even more. Agriculture consumes the majority of Iran's water, yet inefficient irrigation methods waste vast amounts of it. Traditional flood irrigation combined with water-intensive crops unsuitable for dry climates has accelerated depletion. As water becomes scarce, farmers are abandoning their land and migrating to cities. This rural-to-urban migration places enormous pressure on urban infrastructure, housing, employment, and public services. Cities like Tehran, Mashhad, and Shiraz are no longer immune. Tehran, a megacity with millions of residents, relies heavily on dams and groundwater that are rapidly running out. Water rationing has become increasingly common. In many neighborhoods, water pressure drops so low that upper floors receive little or no supply. Residents are forced to store water, raising concerns about hygiene and health. Access to clean water has become unequal, hitting poorer communities the hardest. Public health risks are growing. Water shortages affect sanitation, increase the spread of disease, and reduce overall quality of life. In some areas, polluted water sources are being used out of desperation, leading to long-term health consequences. Hospitals and clinics are also affected as water scarcity complicates basic medical services. The Iranian government often attributes the crisis to drought and climate change. While climate change has reduced rainfall and increased temperatures, experts argue that mismanagement is the primary cause. Water-intensive policies continued even as warning signs became clear. Environmental experts and activists who raised concerns were often ignored or silenced. Instead of reforming water governance, authorities focused on large-scale projects that looked impressive but failed to address sustainability. This crisis has also become a serious political issue. Water shortages have triggered protests across multiple provinces. What begins as demands for water often escalates into broader criticism of government policies, corruption, and inequality. In a country already facing economic sanctions, inflation, and unemployment, water scarcity adds another layer of pressure. The state's response has largely focused on security rather than reform, deepening public frustration. There are also regional implications. Iran shares several rivers with neighboring countries. Tensions over transboundary water resources, particularly with Afghanistan over the Helmand River, are increasing. As water becomes scarcer, disputes over allocation could escalate, affecting regional stability. Water is no longer just a resource, it is becoming a strategic and security issue. Environmental damage is spreading rapidly. Dry lakes and wetlands have turned into sources of dust storms that blanket cities and farmland. These storms carry toxic particles, damaging crops and causing respiratory illnesses. Biodiversity is collapsing as habitats disappear. Wildlife populations are declining, and ecosystems that took centuries to develop are being destroyed in just a few decades. The long-term outlook is deeply concerning. Experts warn that without immediate and fundamental changes, parts of Iran could become uninhabitable. Water scarcity could force mass displacement, intensify social unrest, and weaken the state's ability to govern effectively. The crisis threatens food security, economic stability, and national cohesion. Solutions do exist, but they require political will. Iran would need to overhaul its water management system, reduce agricultural water consumption, modernize irrigation, regulate groundwater use, and restore natural ecosystems. Crop patterns would need to change, and water pricing would have to reflect scarcity. Transparency, scientific planning, and public participation are essential. Without these reforms, technical solutions alone will not succeed. For ordinary Iranians, water scarcity is no longer an abstract issue. It shapes daily routines, economic choices, and future hopes. Parents worry about providing clean water for their children. Farmers watch their land turn to dust. Young people see fewer opportunities and growing uncertainty. Water has become a symbol of deeper systemic failure. Iran's water crisis is a warning not just for the country itself, but for the world. It shows what happens when natural limits are ignored and environmental concerns are sacrificed for short-term goals. Water is life, and when access to water collapses, societies become vulnerable. Iran stands at a critical crossroads. The decisions made today will determine whether the country can adapt and recover or continue down a path of irreversible damage. What is happening in Iran reminds us that environmental crises do not stay confined to nature. They spill into politics, economics, security, and human lives. The water crisis is no longer silent. It is shaping Iran's present and will define its future.